Hello, and thank you for tuning into Millennium Movies. So this is going to be my spoiler-free review of VHS 99, which just dropped on Shudder TV today. And if you'd like me to go more in depth and in detail with a spoiler-filled review of VHS 99, go ahead and drop a comment down below and let me know if you'd like to see that. But without further ado, let's get into this spoiler-free review. So, the biggest question on your mind, if you haven't seen the movie yet, is this a worthy entry into the franchise of VHS? And for me, that's a resounding yes. It doesn't quite hit the heights of the original films that came out, with VHS 1 and VHS 2, but it's also certainly not at the bottom of the barrel like VHS Viral. And, VHS 99 is fresh on my mind right now, where I just finished it about an hour ago, maybe not even an hour ago. But I have to say, I don't know if at least the memory in my head is that, when I initially saw VHS 94, now this could have been because I hadn't gotten any new VHS content in some time, but I remember feeling like, when I watched VHS 94, it felt like the series was back to me. And VHS 99 doesn't quite recapture that same feeling, but it kind of more so feels like it's more of the same. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just kind of maybe thought maybe there could be, this could be an opportunity to sort of, take the franchise to even greater levels. And I'm not sure VHS 99 quite really, it doesn't really do that. But if you just want more VHS 94 and you just want more of the same, I think that VHS 99 gives that to you, and I don't think that it's a terrible thing to just have that be more VHS, right? Because we do love the VHS franchise. So there's more positives than there are negatives, and we're going to go ahead and get into the positives right now. So to me, the biggest positive is the vibes and the aesthetic of all these segments that we got throughout the film. The biggest thing for the VHS franchise, at least to me, is it needs to capture that feeling of what the first two movies were, right? What the fans remember, in the core memories of of their time spent with the VHS movies. And to me, VHS 99 really captures that. Yes, it is a different time period, and the vibes are sort of different in terms of this truly does feel like you're watching a bunch of 90s kids and 90s teenagers and 90s people, in that time period, right? With the dialogue that they have, the way that they speak, the mannerisms that they use, just the way they carry themselves. It does feel like we are in the 90s. So, but while it does that, it doesn't stray away too much from the feel of what a VHS film should be. And I thought that they really captured, with the cinematography that they're using with the cameras in this movie. I think that they really captured the vibes of what the VHS movie should look like and what it should feel like. And this movie has that in spades. It really does a good job on that front. And another thing that I think it does really well is the practical makeup and the CGI, having everything work in conjunction together to create these really gnarly looking and grotesque and just disgusting and absurd creatures and monsters and demons and all the works and all the crazy shenanigans that goes on in these VHS segments. I mean, you already know, the kind of crazy stuff that we see in the VHS movies. And this movie, all the evil creatures and monsters that we see in this film, everything looks really good, like impressively good. And a problem with these types of movies that you can run into is having sort of a when you're working with with a smaller budget than a blockbuster film or a studio film, is that there can be some creative limitations in terms of the things that you want to accomplish on screen. And with VHS 99, it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like whatever any of the creators and any of the directors and writers wanted to bring to the table, whatever stories they wanted to tell, they were able to tell it for the most part with complete creative liberties and creative freedom. And so that is a thing that makes me happy for the directors and the writers and the people who are making these movies, to feel like, with such a talented team of practical and special effects makeup artists, that we can we can tell these stories we want to tell. We can have these weird gnarly creatures come in and mess things up for the characters and the human people that we come across, that go across the journey within these movies. So a lot of great effects, a lot of great makeup and effects work done on these creatures and all the monsters that we see in the movie. So that was a real positive for me. Another thing too that I want to say is going back to capturing that aesthetic and the vibes of the 90s and what VHS is as a franchise. I thought the acting was actually pretty damn good in terms of its believability. I mean, no one in this movie is. I'm not saying that they're going to be Oscar winners, but there's something to be said about believability when it comes to the actors that you have in your films. And I think this also goes hand in hand with the direction, because they have to be directed to act a certain way. And these people do feel like they are living in the 90s. It feels like we're being brought into their world, and it doesn't feel like, we're just watching a movie. And when you have that believability, it just makes you just, you really, it's really easy to just get sucked into that world and be just fall in line with what the story is that they're trying to, put in front of you and bring you into. So the acting and the direction, to working together in conjunction, really, really top notch in this film. I think honestly, it might be some of the best that we've ever seen in the VHS franchise in its totality. So hats off to everybody involved in that department. But sticking sort of with the direction and going, even deeper into the direction, the directors for VHS 99, everybody is really bringing their A game. I don't feel like there's any weak links in terms of direction for any of the segments that we got in this movie. Certainly there's some that I like more than others. The Gawkers and Ozzy's Dungeon are probably my two favorites. Suicide Bit I thought was really, really fun, and that was a really, that was a really cool premise, and I enjoyed the way that they executed that idea, because that's an idea that sort of feels like, Suicide Bit feels like a sort of urban legend, old wives' tale type of story, right? That can be kind of campy and cheesy if it's not executed correctly. But the way that they shot it and the way that they decided to frame that story, I thought it really worked. And with Ozzy's Dungeon, talk about absurdity, right? Flying Lotus and Zoe Cooper. I mean, man, hats off, and I bow at the altar to you guys, because that was my favorite segment, and just because of the absurdity and the just complete outlandish idea that they had for this, it's fun, it's interesting, it's unique, it's creepy, it's wild, it's everything, right? Everything you want to throw in there from the dictionary in terms of craziness. That's what Ozzy's Dungeon segment was. By far my favorite in the movie. It has a nice twist to it too, where in terms of it can feel sort of like it's leading you to a sort of it feels like it sort of, at first it feels like it's coming from a mean-spirited place and sort of a nihilistic view of this scenario that we have here, where with of course we know that a contestant gets badly injured on a children's competitive show, and years later her mother and her family come after the host to try and get revenge on what happened to their daughter, their sister, on the set of the show. And it feels at first like, man, this is really dark and this is not fun to watch at all. But when it finally starts to get going in terms of where we're really going and where we're going to get to at the end of that story and that segment, man, I freaking love that. So Ozzy's Dungeon is a great segment into the VHS franchise. That's one that I'm never ever going to forget. So the Gawkers is another one that I wanted to highlight as well, because that sort of, again, goes back to the believability that I was talking about earlier, in terms of, it's just a bunch of shitty, horny teenage boys, gawking over their neighbor, right? But it's what happens to them, and how quickly those things happen to them, and how crazy it gets, and how and how just everything sort of comes crashing down on them in a matter of seconds. I love that, and I love the way that they do. I love the way that they executed that. I love the way that they filmed that. I loved everything about it. It was simple. It wasn't too crazy in terms of what they were bringing to the table, but it was executed. It was executed really well, and that goes a long way in terms of just telling a really fundamentally sound story. And I thought that they did that with the Gawkers. And with other segments, the other two segments that I haven't talked about yet, in terms of just singling them out, I thought that they were, just fine. The final segment, which was directed by the directors, the Winters family, who directed the most recent Deadstream movie, which was also on Shudder right now. I thought that segment had a lot of cool makeup and effects work, and the idea was kind of crazy. For some reason, it just didn't kind of click with me, and sort of the comedic dialogue that was going on, the back and forth between the two protagonists in that story. It kind of felt a little too campy to me personally, so I didn't really buy into that story all that much. And then the very first segment that kicked off the entire film actually worried me a little bit, because I wasn't. It kind of felt like sort of the basics of what you expect out of the VHS franchise, or maybe what a casual viewer might think of the VHS franchise from the outside looking in. And in terms of like, oh, we have these unlikable protagonists, and they go out and they're troublemakers, and they're causing all this trouble, and they're making fun of each other, and they're making fun of each other's friends, and things of that nature, and they're just not good people. And then of course while this crazy absurd thing happens to them. And it's kind of also in a sort of way where it's like, if you're not buying into the monsters who are coming after these kids, it can kind of seem a little cheesy. And just there's sort of some just odd, weird unbelievability to the monsters and what they do at the end of the film. But it's fine. It's fine for what it is. Those are some of the two weaker segments to me, but there's three really good segments and there's two okay segments. So that sort of comes together and that forms, it gives us a movie where I think there's more good than there is bad. So if you haven't seen VHS 99 and you're considering it right now, I think you should definitely do it if you're a fan of the franchise. And even if you're not a fan of the franchise, there's enough here, I think, for you to enjoy during this October and Halloween season. So, yeah, that's been my spoiler-free review of VHS 99. If you want to stay up to date on all the latest in the world of movie and TV news, well, you're already in the right place, and I hope you can consider subscribing to the channel because I would love to have you along for the ride. But until next time, this has been Millennium Movies. I will see you all very soon.